Photoshop is a great tool for touching up photos and creating your own graphics, but if you've never used the program before, it can be a bit intimidating at first. Not to worry. In this video, I'm going to go over the basics, including what some of these tools and features are for. I'll also give you tips for setting up your workspace. Let's start by opening an existing image file. Just go to File in the upper left corner, choose Open, then find and select the image you want. In this case, I'm going to use a JPEG that I already have saved to my computer. This is how most Photoshop projects begin. Generally, you're editing something you already have, not starting from scratch. But if you want, you can go to the File menu and choose New to create a blank file instead. As you can see, the image has opened in the center. This is called the document window. It tells you the file name right here, along with the current zoom level. In our example, you'll notice that we're currently viewing the image at about 25% because the original photo is so large. To zoom in, you can press Ctrl+ on your keyboard or Command+ if you're using a Mac. To zoom out, press Ctrl- or Command-. To the left is the Tools panel, which is one of the most important features in Photoshop. This is where you'll select whatever tool you want to use to edit your image. For example, this one lets you add text. And if you click and hold the command, you can access more tools that are similar but slightly different. If a lot of these tools seem unfamiliar right now, that's okay. You'll learn more about them as you get more experience with Photoshop. Let's take a look at the Control panel next. That's the area above your file where you can change the settings for your current tool. The options are specific to whatever tool you have selected, so they'll always be different. Right now we're using the Text tool, so we can change things like the font size, alignment, and color. If we select a different tool, you can see that the options change. On the right side of the document window, you'll find a few more panels. The most important one is the Layers panel. Here you can see the different layers in your document and turn them on or off. Right now we only have one layer, the one that's called Background by default, but you could end up with quite a few depending on the project you're working on. You'll get more experience with layers once you start working with images. Finally, there's the menu bar at the top of the screen. Remember, we already used this to open our image file. The menu bar is kind of a catch-all in Photoshop. It gives you access to common file tasks like save, undo, and copy and paste, but it also has commands for editing that aren't on the regular Tools panel. Under Image, for example, you can adjust things like contrast, color, and size. If you go to the Filter menu, you can access advanced tools and effects like Blur and Sharpen. Now that you know your way around, I'd like to show you a few more tips. These might not seem important right now, but they'll come in handy throughout your time with Photoshop. Let's start with ways to customize your workspace by showing, hiding, and moving panels. To show or hide any panel, just go to the Window menu. Then you can click the panel you want. Panels that are currently visible will have a check mark next to them. I think I'm going to turn on the History panel. To move a panel, click, hold, and drag wherever you want it to go. As you can see, you can move panels anywhere in the Photoshop window. If you're just starting out though, we recommend keeping most of the panels in their default position for now. If you ever need to reset your panels, go back to the Window menu, mouse over Workspace, then choose the option that says Reset Essentials. Note that this process may be different depending on the version of Photoshop you're using. For instance, in Photoshop Elements, you'll just go to Window, then Reset Panels. Finally, there's one change we recommend making behind the scenes. It has to do with the type of unit Photoshop uses to measure an image's dimensions. To access the setting on a Mac, go to Photoshop on the menu bar, mouse over Preferences, and then choose Units and Rulers. Now, if you're using Windows, this is going to be found in the Edit menu instead. By default, Photoshop measures dimensions in inches, which is great if you're editing images for print. However, if you're editing for the web, we suggest that you change this to pixels. Then click OK when you're done. And that should do it. Now that you have everything set up and you know how to get around the program, you can start using Photoshop to edit your first image. In Photoshop, saving works a bit differently from other programs. Instead of working with one main file type, like a document in Word, you'll find several options to choose from, including JPEG, PSD, and more. If any of these formats sound unfamiliar, that's okay. I'm going to tell you more about them over the course of this video. Ultimately, the option you choose just depends on the project. Take this image for example. Here I have a simple photo that I took myself. All I did was crop and rotate it. Now I'd like to send a copy to my friends. A common file type like JPEG or PNG would be a great choice for this. Probably JPEG because that's better for high-quality photos. These file types can be viewed and edited on almost any computer or device, so that makes them perfect for sharing with others. What if you had a photo that you put a little more work into? For example, something with text or adjustment layers. If you only saved it as a regular image, you wouldn't be able to come back and re-edit those things later. Luckily, Photoshop has a special format called PSD that'll preserve your layers and other important info. PSD files can only be opened in Photoshop, so if you plan to share the image, you'll just need to save a copy in one of the common formats too. No matter what format you plan to use, you'll find everything you need under File on the menu bar. If you're saving an image for the first time or saving a new version, you'll generally use Save As. This will give you access to all the common file types, including PSD. This part of the process is pretty simple. Just type a name for your file, then choose where you want it to be saved. If the original file is in the same folder and you don't want it to be overwritten, just make sure to use a different file name. When you're done, go ahead and click the menu here, and you can select the format you want. As you can see, there are lots of options to choose from beyond what we've already talked about, including bitmap, GIF, and much more. In this case, we're going to choose Photoshop, also known as PSD, so we can keep editing the image later if we need to. With this option, make sure Layers is checked, then click the Save button, and that's all it takes. Now you can save your progress anytime by going back to File, then clicking Save. Let's take a look at Save for Web next. This is a really good option if you're planning to post the final image online, for instance on your blog, portfolio, or any other website. All you have to do is click, and you'll be taken to a special dialog box. As you can see, this works a little differently from Save As. You'll still find formats like JPEG and PNG to choose from, but this time you can optimize them for the web. You'll also find other settings that'll help you prep the image for posting. If you go with JPEG, for instance, you can customize the quality level. You may want to experiment with this while you watch the preview on the left. The goal is to find the right balance between quality and a smaller file size. That's what really makes an image suitable for the web. The number below the preview will tell you exactly what the file size is. Now look closely at the tabs at the top of the window. See them up here on the left? If you click the one that says 2 up, you can actually compare your changes to the original image. This is an easy way to make sure you haven't lost too much quality with the options you've chosen. In this example, the images look pretty similar, but the file size on the new version is quite a bit smaller. You can also change the dimensions of your image right here in the dialog box. This can be a good way to reduce the image if you're still struggling with file size. Just enter the width or height that you want, then press Enter on your keyboard, and you can see the effect immediately. When you're ready, go ahead and click Save. Then follow the usual steps of naming the file and choosing a location. Now click Save one more time, and that's it. Ultimately, the saving option you choose will vary from project to project. Sometimes you'll save a copy in more than one format, like we just did here. The best way to go about it is to think ahead and try to imagine what you'll need from the image, both now and in the future. Soon the whole process of saving will start to feel like second nature. Layers are one of the most important features in Photoshop, so it's important that you understand how they work. Basically, layers let you combine different things in your image, whether it's text, shapes, or other objects that overlap. They can also be used to adjust the image in ways that you may not have realized. Why don't we take a closer look? This image actually has 4 layers. It might help to think of them as transparent panes of glass. When they're stacked on top of each other, they appear to be flat. But if you pull them apart, you can see that they're all working together to create the final image. There are many types of layers in Photoshop, but they fall into two main categories: content layers and adjustment layers. Content layers are pretty self-explanatory. They contain some type of object, like text, a graphic or a shape, or even your main image. Adjustment layers are a little different. Instead of containing an object, they have an effect on the layers below. In this example, we have a levels adjustment layer, which is making the cake image just a tiny bit brighter. Adjustment layers are a type of non-destructive editing, meaning they don't actually change anything about the original image, they just sit on top. So you may be wondering, why even use layers? Wouldn't it be easier to just work with everything in your image at once? The truth is, layers are useful because you can work with them independently. That gives you a lot more flexibility and control. Once you get more comfortable with them, you'll use them in your projects all the time. To get started, make sure the Layers panel is visible. It's usually found in the bottom right corner. If you don't have it, you can go to the Window menu to turn it on. If you've never used layers before, we recommend trying an adjustment layer first. Remember, these don't contain any kind of object, they just let you adjust some aspect of your image. That makes them really easy to add and play around with. First, select the layer below where you want the adjustment to appear. In this example, we'll select the cake layer. Next, click the Adjustment button at the bottom of the panel. It's the one that looks like a half-filled circle. Here, you'll find lots of options to choose from depending on what you need. For instance, you could add an effect like posterize, or change the image's color balance. In this case, we're going to choose Hue Saturation to see if we can make the colors a little more vibrant. Once you make your selection, a layer will be added to your document, and the Properties panel will appear. Here you can make your adjustment and see the effect it has on the image in real time. See how it works? The Properties panel might seem confusing at first, but don't worry. You'll learn more about it as you get more experience with Photoshop. For now, it's okay to experiment. When you're done, you can leave this panel open, but in my case I'm going to close it so we can see the entire image again. There are some other features you should know about that'll make working with layers a whole lot easier. For instance, using the buttons at the bottom of the panel, you can delete your current layer or create a new one from scratch. There's also a way to duplicate layers, which is similar to using copy and paste. To do this, you can right-click the layer you want, then choose Duplicate from the menu, or you can simply drag and drop the layer to the New Layer button here. This will create a copy automatically. I don't really need this though, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Now, one of the best things about layers is how flexible they can be. You can hide them or change the order that they're in, all without making any permanent changes to the image. Hiding a layer can be useful if you want to get it out of the way, for example, so you can edit some other part of the image. All you have to do is click the eye icon next to the layer you want. As you can see, this works for adjustment layers too. Now we're looking at the original photo without any alterations. To turn the layers back on, just click the icons again. The order of your layers also plays an important role in the final image. As you might have gathered, layers at the top of the list always appear in front of layers at the bottom. To change the order of a layer, select the one you want, then drag and drop it into place. Just be mindful of any content that overlaps with the layers below. You might end up covering parts of your image by mistake. Let's go back to the original order, with the cake layer in the background and the levels layer down here. The last thing I'd like to show you is how to edit the contents of your layers. You can do this using the options in the Tools panel and also the Filter menu. Every layer is different, so not all tools and filters will work for the layer you have in mind. Still, there are some basic tasks that you can learn that'll definitely come in handy. To get started, select the layer you want to work with. Otherwise, you might end up editing the wrong layer by mistake. Next, click the tool you want to use. We'll choose the Move tool. Now watch what happens when I click and drag on the document. It moves the text layer only, because that's the one we have selected. We can do the same with the rings layer. There we go, that looks good. What if you have an adjustment layer and you want to revisit the adjustments you've already made? All you have to do is select the layer and the Properties panel should appear. Now, in my case, I actually closed the panel earlier, so I'll need to double-click the layer icon to reopen it. Now we can make whatever changes we want. I'm just going to adjust the hue again, and try reducing the saturation instead. The process for editing text is just as easy. All you have to do is double-click the layer icon. This lets you edit the text directly in the document area. When you're done, press Escape on your keyboard, and that's it. There are lots of different ways to use layers in Photoshop, which is something you'll get a better feel for over time. For now, you know everything you need to get started, including what layers are for and how to work with them in your documents. Most photos aren't perfect. As you gain more experience with Photoshop, you'll probably start to notice some common problems that you wish you could fix. Luckily, there are ways to do this, even if you're not a seasoned pro. In this video, we're going to cover everything you need to get started, including how to adjust your levels, curves, saturation, and more. Levels let you adjust the shadows, highlights, and midtones in your image, which are things that every image has. Shadows are the darkest parts, highlights are the brightest, and the midtones are everything in between. There are many reasons why you might use a levels adjustment. For example, here we have a photo that's underexposed, which means not enough light was captured when the photo was taken. If we adjust the levels, we can make the midtones and highlights brighter so the details are easier to see. Let me show you how it works. First, go ahead and create an adjustment layer. Make sure to choose the Levels option from the menu. When the Properties panel appears, you should see a graph in the center. This is called the histogram. The histogram shows you data about the shadows, midtones, and highlights in your image. You can make adjustments using the sliders below. Now, this might seem a little strange at first, but don't worry. With some hands-on experience, you'll start to get the hang of it. In our example, we're going to move the highlight slider so it's where the histogram actually ends, and then move the midtone slider a little to the left, which will make the image a bit lighter overall. Every image is unique, so when you start doing this on your own, you will see some big differences between histograms. Basically, the key is to target the endpoints with the shadow and highlight sliders. Then you can adjust the midtones depending on what you need, for example, lighter or darker. Just be careful not to move the sliders too far past the endpoints. This can cause you to lose detail in your image, also known as clipping. As always, if you do end up making a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can just move the slider back or press Ctrl-Z or Command-Z to undo. When you're done, here's a tip that'll let you compare the adjustments to the original image. Just turn the layer on or off using the icon here. See how the original is so much darker overall? In the new version, the sky and the clouds look much brighter, so the subject is easier to see. Similar to levels is a feature called curves. The difference is that curves let you adjust shadows, highlights, and midtones separately. The tool is a bit harder to use, but for experienced users, it does offer a lot more control. Let's take a look at how it works. Just like before, you'll start by adding an adjustment layer. This time, choose Curves. When the panel appears, you should see a diagonal line that has two beginning and end points. This is where you'll make your adjustments. Of course, it looks very different from the Levels interface, but it has the same arrangement of shadows on the left and highlights on the right. To add a point, just click anywhere on the line, then drag up, down, left, or right to see the effect it has. One of the simplest things you can do with curves is to increase the contrast. To do this, you'll need to drag the curve down towards the left, then click to add a second point and drag it up near the right. See how we've created a gentle curve that follows the upward slope of the line? By dragging it down near the shadows and up near the highlights, we've intensified those parts of the image. If we wanted to decrease the contrast, we could just do the opposite. Drag it down here instead, and then up over here. Just be careful to avoid big steep curves that don't follow the slope of the line. As with levels, you can end up losing a lot of detail in your image. While you're still getting the hang of curves, you might want to check out the Presets menu too. Here you'll find lots of built-in options that you can then customize as needed. These can also help you get a better understanding of how the Curves interface works. If you ever need to start over, just go back to the menu and choose Default. There are many times when you might want to adjust the colors in your image. With saturation, you can increase or decrease the color intensity, either as a correction or just for artistic effect. Luckily, this is one of the easiest adjustments you can make in Photoshop. All you have to do is add an adjustment layer for hue saturation. Then you can make your changes using the slider here. If the colors in your image are dull or muted, increasing the saturation will make them look more vivid. If you drag the slider in the opposite direction, you can see that it reduces the intensity instead. You can even create a black and white or grayscale image by dragging it all the way to the left. As with levels and curves, you'll want to avoid making extreme adjustments. For example, watch what happens when I drag the slider all the way to the right. Now we've lost a lot of detail in the image, and the colors look pretty unnatural. I'm just going to drag this a little bit back towards the left, and I think that should do it. Of course, this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to making color adjustments. If you go back to the Adjustments menu, you'll find lots of other options to choose from. Vibrance, for example, will up the saturation for parts of your image without oversaturating the parts that are already colorful. Black and white, on the other hand, will give you more control over desaturation. Make sure to check these out when you have some time on your own. Finally, some corrections are harder to pull off than others. Luckily, Photoshop comes with several auto adjustment tools that can help you make specialized corrections in no time. Take this image, for example. See how the snow sort of has a bluish tint to it? To fix this, all we have to do is go to the Image menu, then choose the option that says Auto Color. Now the snow looks white. If you go back to the Image menu, you'll see there are two more auto adjustments to choose from: Auto Tone and Auto Contrast. Another place that you'll sometimes find an auto option is within certain adjustment layers. In general, these can be a great way to improve your image quickly, without much time and effort. You can also just plan to use them as a starting point and tweak the adjustments afterwards to customize them. Whether your image is too light or too dark, too dull or too saturated, you can fix all kinds of common problems in Photoshop. Now you know some tools that can help you improve your images dramatically, including levels, curves, saturation, and more. By now, you probably know how to adjust simple properties in your images, like shadows, highlights, and color. But what if you had something with a less obvious issue? For example, a photo that looked soft, or maybe even a little grainy. Fortunately, Photoshop comes with a number of filters that can help you with something like this. Today I'm going to show you two of them: sharpening and also a feature called noise reduction. Sharpening does exactly what you would think. It can make your images sharper or clearer so certain details are easier to see. It can't fix photos that are blurry or out of focus, unfortunately, but if you have an image that's a bit soft, like this one, it can help. Anytime you're working with filters, it's a good idea to duplicate your layer first, so you aren't making changes to the original. Just right-click, choose Duplicate Layer from the menu, and then give it a name. We'll type Sharpen to make it easy to tell the layers apart. When you're done, go up to Filter on the menu bar, then mouse over the option that says Sharpen. Here you'll find a few different filters to choose from. They'll all sharpen your image, but in different ways and to different degrees. We're going to use the one called Unsharp Mask, which may sound a bit weird, but it's exactly what we need. It's very easy to use, and it'll let us customize the results. As you can see, this filter gives you three different settings to work with: amount, radius, and threshold. You'll see a preview in the document window as long as this box stays checked. You also have a smaller preview that you can easily reposition. Notice that when you hold this with your mouse, it toggles the preview on and off, which makes it easy to compare the sharpened version to the original. Now, anytime you use sharpening, it's important not to make any extreme adjustments. You can end up doing more harm than good. That being said, it's still okay to experiment, and nothing in Photoshop is permanent. Why don't we get started with the radius setting? Radius controls the size of the details that are being sharpened, so generally it's best to set it to a lower value. Too high, and the edges will start to look unnatural or exaggerated. This is called a halo effect. We recommend something between 0.3 and 0.5 for most images. You can even enter the exact value here. You could go a bit higher if you were working with a higher resolution photo. The amount setting controls the level of sharpness being added. How much you need depends on several different things, including the image size, so it's good to play around with this. This time, if you go too low, the effect on the image may not be strong enough. See how it still looks kind of soft? In this case, I think I'm going to set the amount fairly high, somewhere between 180 and 190. Finally, sharpening has a tendency to make image noise more visible. Those are the tiny little flecks that can make your photo look grainy. You might even see some in the background here. Increasing the threshold can help you reduce this, but you have to be careful. It can cause your sharpening to become inconsistent. Therefore, we recommend leaving this set to 0, unless the filter is creating lots of extra noise for you. So there we have it. I think we're done. The difference is subtle, but it does make the image look a bit more crisp. Once again, you can click and hold the preview to toggle it on or off. When you're satisfied, go ahead and click OK. Noise isn't just caused by sharpening. It can also appear in your image for other reasons. For example, if the photo was taken in lower light. Luckily, you can reduce this using a noise reduction filter. Once again, you'll start by duplicating your layer, so you aren't making changes to the original. You can right-click like before, or just drag the layer down to the New Layer button. Next, go ahead to the Filter menu, then mouse over the Noise option. You'll want to choose the one that says Reduce Noise, and a dialog box will appear. When you apply noise reduction, you're actually removing information from the image, so you have to be careful when using this feature. Removing too much noise can lead to blurriness or a loss of detail. The key is to take it one setting at a time and just keep adjusting them until you're happy with the results. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we have Strength, which basically controls how much noise reduction is being applied. We recommend starting at the maximum value so you can see your adjustments more easily, but you can always set it to something else later if you need to. Next, we have Preserve Details, which controls how much of the original image is left untouched. You might want to play with this one a bit while you keep an eye on the preview. Choose a setting that's too high, and you'll actually cancel the effects of the filter. But if you go too low, you'll start to lose detail. We're going to shoot for something less extreme, maybe around 5 or 10%. This keeps some of the detail, but also gets rid of a lot of the noise. Sometimes, noise will look like small patches of individual colors. The word for this is color noise. You can mitigate the effect by increasing the Reduce Color Noise setting. Just be careful not to increase it too much, or depending on the image, the colors might start to bleed together. For most images, we recommend a lower setting. I think 40 or 50% should do it for this one. Finally, reducing noise can also cause the image to lose some sharpness. You can add that sharpness back using the Sharpen Detail setting. Just like Preserve Details, increasing this too much can cancel the effects of the filter, so you generally want to aim lower. In this example, we're going to set it to about 10%, which should sharpen it just enough to make a difference. Keep in mind, you can use the same click and hold method to compare the filtered version to the original. If you look closely, you'll see that the difference is pretty slight, but we did manage to reduce some of the noise. As you can see, there are lots of minor problems that you may not have realized you can fix in Photoshop. Now you know how to sharpen your images and reduce image noise using two easy-to-use filters.